Talking About My Generation, the podcast with Lee Scriven and Del Bromham.
Hello and welcome to Talking About My Generation, an episode that I am extremely excited about. And the reason being, we've got one of the most pivotal personalities in rock music with us. Fair to say...
That's enough about me, Lee.
Yeah, okay. As well as Del Bromham. But
I wondered who was talking.
No, I'm delighted, really delighted to welcome Terry Marshall, obviously of Marshall Amplification. Terry, thank you for joining us.
My pleasure, man. Yeah, we've known each other for a long time.
We have, all this room, in the room. We're all good friends. Terry, if you haven't listened to the podcast before, what we normally do is just ask a few questions just to get your personality over a little bit so people can, question where you come from and what you've been doing. Right, one, always at the old chestnut. First record ball.
That would be Little Richard.
Brilliant.
Yeah. I love Little Richard basically because they had the saxophone line up in there. I just love the dynamics of it.
Which one was that? Which
That's a bloody good question.
Long till
Memory's
Saturday.
not that.
Tutti Frutti?
I had Tutti Frutti, yeah, definitely couldn't miss out one. But I also loved all the tracks he did when he did the film. I can't help it.
I was just going to say that, Terry, because we spoke a few weeks back about the importance of cinema. Now, I'm presuming you would not have heard regularly Little Richard on BBC Radio.
No.
So it would have been the cinematic experience of not only seeing the eyes, but hearing them with volume. Is that right?
Yeah, it's it was enthusiasm for me. When I first, the music I was introduced to was by Count Basie, because my dad loved Basie. So there I was listening to Eddie Lockjaw Davis and people like that. And certain saxophone players installed me. But because of my association, I was earning money when I was a musician at 14.
Yeah, I was going to come on to that, yeah.
Okay.
You were out there early.
And I was pro when I was 16 before we had even a shop.
Wow. And that all playing with dance bands around the area?
I was playing rock and roll.
It was rock and roll?
Yeah. I went pro with a band called the Flintstones.
Shabba dabba doo.
Yeah, and later on I went from them to the Flea Wreckers.
Wow, amazing. Okay.
Well, do you know what? This is interesting because I meant to ask you about this, the Flea Wreckers. When I was at school, there was a young kid called Paul Elms. And I don't know if he was in the same time as you, but he was 15 years old. And he said, I'm joining... He was a jazzer, and it was odd for us because we was all into the Beatles and the Stones and all that. And he was into jazz. And he ended up playing with the Flea Wreckers. And I thought, Terry played with them. This would have been about 1966.
No, I gave up being on the road because of the business.
Yeah.
Stopped me from touring.
Yeah.
That was at the time when it was just starting to explode.
Yeah. And your first gig scene, the first rock and roll or whatever gig did you see? What was the first one, can you remember, that you sort of can vividly remember?
That's another good question. I was lucky. I used to go up into the city in London, and I used to go to all-nighters and play those. I've played with unbelievable amount of guys. Went on tour. It covered the whole country. That was with both those bands I've mentioned.
Right, yeah.
But that was tied me up. I did all the major venues, and we also did backing artists coming over from the States and things like that.
Okay. Who would you say, was there anybody, saxophone, obviously, who was your main inspiration for you to pick up a saxophone or to become a musician?
Well, it's a combination. Loved Eric. Let me see the most one. Oh, that's a good one. Mainly, actually, I'd never listened to saxophone players. I love the instrument,
right?
But my interest was always in guitar. Listen to guitarists because I've always jammed with guitarists from the age of 14.
That's interesting. He says that because I had the same thing playing guitar, and I think it's why I end up writing songs because the guitar for me was the instrument to relay the music, but it wasn't any specific instrument.
I see.
It was the melody.
Right.
Yeah.
How can I relay this melody?
Yeah. Yeah.
So
On the guitar.
it's-
You do it on the sax.
I've always been a listening musician, so I was always amazed that when I was in the Flintstones and the Flea Wreckers, right, I was only about 18 with the Flea Wreckers, right, and they gave me all the main solos,
yeah, yeah.
right. I was even doing solos on take 5,
Wow.
right. I wouldn't like to do it now, right, but I say it was a mixture of those influences. And I just love the sound of the
Yeah,
instrument.
yeah, yeah.
But my influences has always been listening to guitarists.
And then he met me.
Yeah, well, it's been downhill ever
Yes,
since. But,
exactly.
yeah, playing with guitarists. I've developed a growl, as you know,
Yeah,
from having
yeah,
our
yeah,
jam
yeah.
together. I developed this because I was playing with guitarists who had fuzz boxes. So I had
Right.
to develop a fuzz box inside my throat.
Right.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
There you go. So that's there. So it's the growl I developed listening to musicians who were going towards that area. But because I was battling with guitarists, quite often I've been on stage with about 3 guitarists and a bass player, right? And I've needed to have more growling than usual.
I never thought of that before. Is that, do you think, why in Bill Haley, his sax player in the comics, it was always always roaring, wasn't it?
That's it, because you're playing against guitars with fuzz boxes.
Never thought about that. There you go. You learn
All
new
right,
things
so I had
every
to
day.
develop my own fuzz box.
Well done.
Brilliant.
So going back, so your house, Lonsdale Road, is that right, Southall? Is that right, Southall?
Yeah.
That was a bit like my house, and I think a bit like your
Yeah,
house.
yeah.
That was just music.
Yeah,
Music
full of music.
everywhere.
Yeah, well, my dad was a drum teacher.
Yeah. So I'm going to come on to.
All right, so and obviously I used to play the drums in there to. I'd pick out a record that I liked, and I used to play drums to that, which is normally Little Richard.
Right.
All right, so I was playing rock and roll on drums, but drums wasn't my instrument. You know, my heart wasn't in that instrument. My heart is in. I love to go on stage and be supportive of the people I play with.
Right. Yeah.
All right, I also have a big ego of playing solos.
Right. But
So
you get
give me the
expressive.
space and I will fill it.
Yeah. So you said about that. He was doing the drum lessons, and I'm thinking pretty right in saying like he was one of the few, if only maybe the one, teaching rock and roll drums, which no internet, no people couldn't afford to use the phone, but word got around, didn't it?
Yeah.
And it was extremely popular.
He had a fantastic amount of good players coming to him, or developed into good players.
Well, Mitch Mitchell. Let's talk about Mitch. Mitch was one of his of the Jimi Hendrix experience.
He only did a few with Mitch, because Mitch was a local lad to the Hamel shop.
Yeah.
So Mitch used to come in. He did a bit with him, but not a fantastic amount. He
You
put
formed,
him
did you?
going- but he
you
also
formed a
had.
band with Mitch, didn't you?
Fun?
Didn't you form a band with Mitch?
Yes. Right.
Dale, this guy's played with
right,
Mitch
yeah.
Mitchell. Yeah.
Okay, right. 1962, there's a club called the Ealing Blues Club, which is a cellar club. I was there one evening, which is one of my nights off, which was a Sunday, because I used to be in those days in the shop and everything, and then I would go and we have a meet with our mates and everything at Ealing Blues. There, I think it was the Artwoods. They didn't turn up. The bass player did turn up, Ken Rankin. There was a guitarist singer who I went pro with Flintstones, Rod Freeman, and there was a young drummer called Mitch Mitchell. I don't know what happened to him afterwards. He was 16 and I was 18.
Wow.
We formed a band on the night, and we called it the Soul Messengers. It went down so well, and the guy running the place called Ferry as Gary, who came out of the same school where Pete Townshend used to go to, those guys, college and everything. And we formed it, we went down well, he gave us a year's contract, which I wasn't very happy with because it was my only night off. But in those days, it only took me half a day to recover. Now, if I do 2 or 3 gigs, it takes me a whole week.
2 months. So that success of the drum lessons led to the opening of the first shop, didn't it? And you had a massive responsibility with that first shop. I'm right.
You're not kidding.
Yeah, that must have been.
Right.
I mean, what, you're 16?
Yeah.
16. Here you go. You're running the shop. Get on with it. And by the way, it's unbelievable.
Yeah, yes, it was quite fascinating. Lucky enough, my backup person at the time was my mum.
Right. Yeah.
Right, and if I had to go off on, I was still doing semi-touring and things like that when we first had it, and then my mum would come in. Then we used to have people come in at the weekend, Saturday boys like Mitch.
Yeah.
And that sort of grew. But we had, right from the square one, because it started off as actually as a drum shop.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
But all drummers know musicians.
Sounds, guitarists.
I was very subtle there, drummers knowing musicians.
Yes, okay.
That was
Keep the digs coming about drummers, because
all right.
I shall wrap this up again, because I'll give it to you now, but if it hadn't been for drummers, you guys wouldn't be plugging into a Marshall.
Yeah, that's very
So
true.
we're
You're
not
probably-
bad.
you're
We're not
probably right.
all bad, okay? So I'm going to get it in early. I was going to save it for later.
Good boy. Good boy.
But you were saying now, and I'll just come in there, because you're absolutely right. Most musicians go around in pairs, and especially when you're in a band, because you're like a little band of brothers.
Yeah,
We
yeah.
would all know that. And you
Yeah.
tend to go out socialising together, which is why we spoke about the importance of bands to sort of just normal day culture. And basically, the guitarists, well, they're coming in for drum lessons. I believe Keith Moon may have come in for one lesson. I can't imagine him having too many. But it was the guitar. I mean, let's just for the listener, let's just mention some of the names that would have been coming in here. I mean, Pete Townshend, Richie Blackmore,
Richard
and later we'll talk about Eric later on. But I mean,
Okay. And Big Jib Sullivan.
Big Joe, what guitarist he was. And of course, they're upstairs tapping away, learning how to swing in rock and roll, because I think that's one of the great things that did teach them how not only just to play rock and roll, but with swing. And the great rock and roll drummers, great rock drummers, could all swing.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Definitely.
End of story. That's what made them different to the idiots like me who just did
Mitch
this.
was certainly different.
Yeah.
It was the most busiest drummer I've ever played with,
Yeah.
Yeah.
which sometimes was a bit OTT.
Yeah.
Because he would go blah, 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 where maybe ba-dum dum dum would have been better. But that's another thing.
But it was these guitarists coming into the shop, and you tell me if I'm wrong, but I mean, this is what I love about your story and this story. It's just these people being in this one place in one time. But obviously, they spoke talking to you and the guys, and they wanted to be louder than the drummers. I think that's fair. And then they basically pushed you in to go into amplification.
The person who pushed me into getting an amplifier built was Pete Townshend.
Was Pete, yeah.
It was Pete. He wanted more than was available. At the time, there was the Fender Bassman,
That's right.
Yeah, that's what
which
he was
was
using.
worked
then,
on. It was an RCA circuit, which wasn't sort of. It was available to anyone to use.
Yeah.
The RCA circuit, the Fender Bassman ran at 35 watts RMS, so it could only peak at 50. So it wasn't a 50 watt amplifier. If a guy had a low output guitar, he'd be lucky to get 35 watts out of it.
Right.
Right. We took the circuit. I had it increased its volume, RMS volume, to 45, which meant a guy with a Gibson or a Fender could hit 65 watts.
Right.
Then we had a service engineer who worked with us, who we eventually employed, became part of the company, Ken. I got him to change components, which I was aware of, to get the sound I wanted. Because I'm not a guitarist, I had no loyalty to Vox or Fender. It was the sound I wanted. And having these guys around, that made it first 4x12. My dad hand-built that, because he was a structural engineer working on doing prototype parts for the aircraft industry. He was a toolroom miller. He had nothing to do, he wasn't interested in the amplifier at all. Right? His only thing was the structures and manufacturing.
Yeah.
That was his side.
So you made 6 prototypes, didn't you? 6 prototypes,
No.
and then No?
No, there's a lot of bullshit coming out.
Oh, great.
Right,
Okay. It's not me, I got it off Wikipedia.
Okay. Wikipedia doesn't have the right. No, it was a lot of people saying that we did so many and we chose the one. No, the first one, the amplifier, we had kept after it. There was only... I had customers for the first thing. My biggest challenge was convincing my dad if I made an amplifier I could sell it.
Right.
But lucky enough, I had Pete and the Ox out of the Who ready to buy two. Right, so we made them. They bought the first two.
Yeah.
Okay, so I knew I had customers. So once I convinced it, my dad said, "Okay, if you can sell it, we go into it." But Dad was always the front man of the company.
Yeah.
I wasn't bothered about that.
Yeah.
But he enjoyed it. He got a bigger ego than I have, I think, if I remember rightly. No, he loved all the front lining and everything. It wasn't my bag.
So you kept tweaking this. What I'm interested in, I'm sorry if I'm interrupting, is as in, I'm just seeing, it's like a film for me in my head of like yourself and you say Ken Bram, is it? You say
Ken
Dudley
Bram.
Craven?
No, Dudley Craven was the guy we employed to make the first amps.
Right, okay. So the development was yourself.
He never did
Ken
any
Bram.
development or anything like that.
And it's just tweaking and just like, when did you just, what was the moment you just sort of sat back and went, yeah.
Right. I used a Fender Stratocaster and a Gibson 335 because they were popular guitars at the time. I just listened to it and said, no, I want more of this, more of that. Can you change this component or that component until I got it? I said, that's getting nearer. I need to put the value up on that one to give me what I was after.
Amazing.
All right. When I had the sound that I thought would suit the guys in the shop, who were regular customers, I thought I've got it. So I'm very proud. The Marshall sound is mine.
This is like, that's the birth of rock music, really, if I'm saying. And it is. What you just explained. I mean, this is what makes get tingles down the back of my neck, as in, there you were, just I tweaked that and I tweaked that. And then the end result changed musical culture. End of. And
from a guitarist point of view,
it's
the sound, and you kind of.
When did you first do a Marshall?
When
you just grew up with it. I'm sorry, I mean, grew up with it. It was like, I suppose
that's right. Yeah, I mean, and also it's something that we harked on before on a previous thing. The great thing, just going back to going to your Marshall music shop, was that you never felt, because I used to go in there as a kid.
Mm-hmm.
I was 13 years old, and I was never. I never felt uncomfortable. I've always felt welcome. I was never thought, "Oh, you're a kid, clear off." No. And it's great actually. It's good. Not only is it socially nice, it's also nice because anyone with any sense who runs a shop knows that. Well, if you're welcome, he's going to buy his first guitar in here.
Yeah, well,
and I did. I bought my first Hohner Zambezi solid electric guitar in that shop.
Well, there's a hub there, Terry, wasn't
it? And it was in 1965 in Hamwell.
They were hubs, weren't they? And what I found quite interesting is that the two shops before you came to Milton Keynes both had a cafe right near it.
Yeah, the Rendezvous.
So I would, and again, going to the listeners, Jimmy Page, Eric, Pete, the Ox. I mean, it must. Jeff Beck, we mentioned Jeff Beck. Yeah, I mean, all around these, they were all mates. And where did you go? You went to have a look in the music shop, try something out, and then you go to the cafe. And that was the hub of British rock music and actually world rock music before it really broke, wasn't it? And it must have, the ambience must have been fantastic.
Tell you one of the things that I brought into action in there was when a guy had an amplifier that went wrong, whatever make. It used to be passed to Ken Bram to service because that's his trade. Yeah. He wasn't a developer at all. And what we did was I would loan. I wouldn't rent it out. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't say, okay, it'll be done in a week's time, come back then. I would loan them an amplifier because that's where they get their living.
Oh, right, yeah.
So I didn't want them to lose out on gigs.
Right.
The only problem I had, when we got the second shop in Hamwell, I lived above it. Sometimes on Sundays mornings, I would have musicians knocking on the front door, the door to where I lived, come down. I've had a problem. I've broken a drum skin. Can you help me? Or can you get me some strings, because I broke a couple of strings last night. So it was 24/7 as from start, and I've been the same ever since.
Yeah.
But even now, sort of, I've got a business side and an entertainment side, right? So my business side, because a lot of the people I work with in business sit behind a desk, so they're there from 9 o'clock, and they think my day is behind a desk. My friends, I don't contact musically until after 11, because I know they're still in bed. Right, but they will phone me and contact me right up to midnight. Right, so my days are very long, and I love it.
I must tell you, interject with a story which is kind of good. Some 20 years ago or so, I was very friendly with Leslie West, the guitarist from Mountain, and they were coming over to do their first tour. And Leslie, being Leslie, he still lived in the 60s, in the 70s. I want 4 4x12s. I want 2 bass stacks. Marshall. I went, okay. He said, can you get it for me? Well, I don't know. I'll go and find out. So I've gone down to Bletchley. Said, look, Steve was working in and it happened that not only was it Marshall, but Steve happened to be a big Leslie West fan. Yeah. What? Will you be able to get Leslie in here? Yeah, I should think of it. So Marshall very kindly let me take out of their factory 4x4x12s, 200-watt head amps, 2 bass rigs. Right, just take it out.
Yeah.
Well, going on from that story, which is something else which we talked about, Marshall being very pro musicians, always helpful. I had one of the first Silver Jubilee heads. Right. And I wanted to use that. So, like, we had the 4 4x12s and his head, and I had my one on top of it. We got to the Shepherd's Bush Empire, as it was then, and I walked on stage, turned the amp on,
oh no!
It shorted out. So, unplugged that, gone into one of Leslie's ones and played. About 9:30 in the morning, I thought, I'm going to have to phone up Marshall, see if they can do something with my Jubilee. They put me through to Phil, who was working there at the time. And he said, I've been expecting your call. I said, why? He said, we had a couple of guys in London last night and saw your amp go. Bring it in. He couldn't do it straight away, but he gave me another amp to use. And I kept this amp for about 6 weeks. And I think you crafty devils had an ulterior motive, because I hear that the story was that when my Jubilee was in there, you might be able to tell me that's wrong, but the story I heard from some insiders in Marshall was that Slash played a visit and he's come past the thing, what's that? And it was my Jubilee, right?
Oh, right.
Can I, it belongs to Del Bromham, can I play? Yeah, plugged it in. And I believe he liked it so much that they then developed the Slash amp based on my Silver Jubilee. Wow. And a few years later, Joe Bonamassa is collecting Silver Jubilees amps. Yeah. And I'm in Rock Hard Music, and Joe Bonamassa has traced me to Rock Hard Music in Milton Keynes. I hear Del Bromham's got a Silver Jubilee. Does he want to sell it to me? Really? Yeah, but all I'm saying was that was kind of the way Marshall always helped musicians out.
Yeah, it's the ethos of the company.
It's
almost a ridiculous request. No one's going to give me all that.
Well, it's a religion. When we started export, we had in every country, whoever was actually trading Marshall, I went around and set up the same principle in every country. Dealt with. Right. You will support any musician. So any musician going into, say, Germany, I'd contact the German people and say, okay, we've got this band coming over. If they need anything, help them.
Yeah.
And that's a principle that we started in those early days, and it goes right, and we'll still do it.
And what's the best form of advertising? Seeing Marshall name all over the stage.
Well, it's a backdrop initially.
Yeah, it is, and that's why so many there were metal bands.
We didn't have to pay for much advertising.
No, you didn't. Well, they did it for you, and because you were brilliant. We spoke about the first amp, groundbreaking. Would you argue Eric Clapton's Beano album and the making of the combo was one of the many defining moments in Marshall's history.
It was fantastic appearing there. Just a matter of interest in Eric used to come in the shop. He was one of the first people to buy a Troop 12 of us.
Yeah.
And that was the one that they showed.
And he was about 19 then, I believe, when he was coming in 19, 20.
Yeah.
And this is the thing with your role, Terry. You were of a similar age.
He wouldn't have, and Eric wouldn't have been a major star then.
No.
He'd just been
this is where I think
just walked in the shop.
When I opened this show and I said
mates.
a pivotal personality, this is what I'm on about. Is in I see it in football. You know, the managers, the chairman, are of a certain age, and there's people working in the press and the media or physios, and they're all of a similar age to the players, and they play a massive key in talking to them and finding out what's going on or what's the problem. And I see your role in that because I've been in football for so many. Exactly that. There was no filter with you. I don't know your dad. I never really knew it, but I imagine the age difference might have been. There might have been a sense of awkwardness, and he's more of a businessman. But you were their friend, but you were still representing Marshalls, and that's what I mean about being so pivotal to it all. Yeah. I think without your presence, if you'd have said to your father, "No, I'm not interested in the shop. I'm going on the road," I'm not so sure it would have panned out as it did.
Well,
that's how important I think you were.
I was multifunctional, multifaceted. I used to work in the shop. I used to do most of the buying for both the factory and the retail. Half my day I would go down to the factory and work. This is an interesting one. My mum used to be working the factory with us. We used to do, I used to do covering alongside my dad. I've even got the scarf for one of them. That was recovering a JTM 45. My mum used to glue up because we used to contact adhesive, and I worked alongside my dad. Mm-hmm. We were both doing covering. So half my day was in the factory, half my day was in the office and the shop. And in the evening, I did the PR stuff, going out and joining up with bands and jamming. And that's why I've been jamming all my life. I used to do gigs, and then I used to go to all-nighters, and then carry on till 4 in the morning, and still got up early in the morning to do everything I did.
So you were a people. Get back to that though. The what I was talking about, the Beano album, and obviously the development of the combo, which I believe came about. Because Eric just wanted to have a smaller amp put in his car. He didn't want to have all the 4x4s and a separate amp. And out of necessity. But again, it's your ability to listen to a friend, and I call them a friend, so they were your friends, and go, hang on, there's something here. Eric just keeps moaning that he can't get it in the car. What are we doing? And Eric's one of thousands of musicians. And again, by a beautiful default, out comes an astonishing amp and a result, an astonishing album that reflects. Astonishing. You agree with me, Del? That album has just stood the test of time.
Now, I can remember, I was only about 14 or 15, and we had my first manager was well into the blues. It's where I came. I was a late starter, if you like, on blues. It was the English people first, like the Erics and the John Mayalls and all that first, and from that I got introduced to the early ones. But the first thing that strikes you as soon as you put the record on was the sound of that guitar. I'd never heard one sound like that before.
Amazing.
There's a great interview done on YouTube by the guy who wrote the first history book, right? And he's interviewing Eric, and right in the middle of Eric, it was about an interview about a guitar. Right in the middle of it, he said, "Oh, where's a Marshall when you need it?" I've kept that. It's
but it's interesting. I don't know if it was interesting because I think he had the combo first, and then got the Les Paul afterwards. Because like one of my favourite albums was 5 Live Yardbirds, and he always used to use a Telecaster.
Correct.
Right.
And then I don't know why, but when it comes to the Beano album, he changed to a Les Paul.
Yeah.
Right.
And I don't.
I wasn't aware of that.
I wonder why. Was he looking for something different? Because if he was looking, he found it.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was interesting because the association with Cream is quite something, because there's a pub very near to where the shop is, where bands used to rehearse above it, the Viaduct pub.
Oh yeah, the Viaduct.
Cream rehearsed there before they went on the road.
Wow.
Really?
Right, and I heard all of Cream's music on 2 acoustic guitars, because Jack and Eric used to come in the shop. They'd been to the rendezvous for the cafe, and then they came in and said, "Okay, do you mind if we use a couple of acoustics?" Well, they were joined at the hip at the time. You know, you couldn't separate them. They were living each other's life. They did it all, and obviously I heard all of their material on 2 acoustic guitars.
And Jack was a jazzer as well, wasn't he?
Yeah.
Well, and Ginger Baker.
Yeah, and Ginger was a jazzer.
That's what I'm on about rock and roll. When it can swing,
Yeah.
it goes somewhere else.
Yeah.
Because they got that ability to combine both.
And the beauty of it, Eric invited me when they did their first gig in London at the...
Was it Richmond?
No, the one in the city centre, in the city next to... We joined them in the pub opposite Marquee.
The Marquee.
Oh, the ship.
Right, yeah, we went to the ship.
Yeah, we
Right.
like the ship, don't we?
There was only 4 of us there. It was Ginger, Eric, Jack and myself.
Wow.
They went on stage, I went out the front, bang, that was Cream.
Wow. This is why I wanted to do this podcast. This is a bit scary territory. Roy Orbison, he took the amp to America, didn't he? Did that make a difference? Was America difficult to break at first?
No, because Americans were very keen on the British stuff. The most important thing is you look after your own trade in the UK, and then the people were taking it abroad with them. But because of the association we had with distributors in every country, I set up that any band went over there, they didn't have to carry the gear.
That was the big thing, wasn't it?
They could use the same gear they did in the UK.
The Stack story.
Ah,
Are we
that's a
going to
good
confirm
one.
it, or
Right.
should we just leave it out there as an
No, the Stack one is a
because
great one.
my take on it, and then you can say, "Oh, Scribs, you got that completely wrong." Obviously, because Pete Townsend was very instrumental.
Pete Townsend,
He wanted more volume,
Right.
an incredible amount. Let me
Right.
just—it's funny that you said about them giving you an amp. Just for the listeners, now in the early '90s, I decided to take Tommy, do a version of Tommy, a bit like a tribute act before there were tribute acts, and used young musicians and we did it, and we thought, we need a Marshall Stack to do this. Can't use a little P, a little amp, a little combo. No, we got it. And this again is a great example. And the reason I'm telling this is it shows you everything about Marshalls. I had no connections with Marshall at all. Just a drum, just knew those up the road. Went in the shop a few times. And I wrote a letter, typed it, my mum did because I can't spell, and I sent it to Marshalls, not to Jim or anything. Just said, I'm doing this youth sort of project with everything. Any chance we could possibly use a Stack? And within about 3 or 4 days, I went, yeah, come and get it whenever you want. And I said, can it be original? Because we're trying to keep it original. So it was one of the original ones. And we couldn't wait to get to rehearsal, so we carted it down there. And then we all just sat there going, like Phil Chamberlain, Phil. He was like 19, and he was just going. It was like a shrine, it was like this beam. But this is the funny bit, right? So we get on Spencer on the drums, and Premier gave us a double kit as well, so it was a great setup, and we're all like excited, going, right, get the amp on, and we put it on. We couldn't get it. It was like we put it on about 4 or 5, thinking, yeah. It'd be like this, like Back to the Future, where you're just going, oh my god, and we all say, well, what are we going to do? And in the end, we had it on about 1 or 2, So it was just, and then I'm thinking of all the stories of the hurt Ronnie Scott's doing Tommy, and in Ronnie Scott's with like 2 of these bastards behind him, thinking, no wonder they're half mutton Jeff, It's like, but it was just remarkable, but. And we did use it, and it looked fantastic, and it gave us such a lift. But I thought it was a nice way just to say that this is what Marshalls were about.
Yeah,
didn't know me. It wasn't like, oh, Scribs is on the phone, right, sort him out. They just knew what I was doing, believed in it. Yeah, and we dropped it back. But yeah, remarkable. But the Stack story, as I understand it, and quickly tell me if I'm wrong, is that Pete was a massive instigator, and you're right.
Pete and I designed the first 8x12. It was straight fronted. It gave us a chance to do so. We only built 6 of them. Obviously, Pete and John Entwistle bought the first 4. The other 2 were still in the factory, and the Faces bought them.
Really?
They saw them and they wanted them.
Yeah, I bet everybody.
Now, they were not feasible to work because at the time we used to buy sheets of timber, 8x4 sheets, because we're old imperial measurements, 8x4. You still buy them, by the way, 8x4s, but
Yeah.
they'll do metric figures, which turned out to 1,000 by thousands. So we bought that. So the first cabinets we built were designed to cut into, because it's 48 inches, we cut 11 7/8 strips, because the 8th made up the 12th was the saw cut. So we had to make them wider because of the height and everything. So therefore we came up and made them 16 7/8, because with the saw cut you get 3 cuts out of a 4 foot. That's the story about how deep they were and how we did.
Right.
On the first ones we had a problem with some vibration on the back. Now my first experiences was working, as you said about chassis foots earlier. Right, I used to set up the double basses, and we have a bass, you have a sound bar in the middle of it. So I use that concept to bow the back of the cab, which stopped the vibration.
Wow. And then the reason to cut them in half was the roadies, is that right?
No, hernia jobs.
Yeah.
No, so we couldn't make them. It's it just...
They just had to be that. But then in a way, that's what made the stack.
Yeah, that's what the stack
That's the
came
stack.
from. Yeah.
Yeah, again, just like listening, again, it comes back to Marshall's listening, not only to the guitarist this time, because I think Pete had the but it was the roadies going, mate, we're not kiting these all around America. And like, yeah, in basic terms, you thought, well, let's cut them in half then. But you listened. You didn't say, well, that's it, get on with it. This is what I love about, and I think this is why Marshall is such a great company, because it listened to what musicians wanted.
Yeah, well, say when Pete came, I was in the Hayes factory at the time. Hayes factory was in Silverdale Road. I had an office upstairs, and we came up there and we discussed it, and we sketched it all out and all that kind of stuff. Then all I had to do is say, we want these, I want 6 of them.
Wow.
So that went into production. My dad organised that production because that was his side. I say, then that was the birth of the stack.
Did you play on Del? You must have played through stacks, yeah.
Yeah. But funny
Is there something special about them? I mean, because I'm a drummer, I don't understand these things. But guitarist to guitarist or to musician, they must be worthy of their acclaim.
Yeah, because the other thing about it is, whether it's by accident or whether by design, I don't know. But the other thing when you had the stack was that, and particularly if you're on a big stage, you've actually got the resonance of the bottom end on the floor.
Yeah, right.
You got, and this is what I was saying about, when Terry and I were talking before the thing we were talking about, the various levels like bass levels and things like that. But when it's a stack, a guitar seems so full bodied. It's almost like it's complete.
Yeah.
Actually, it's not. It's kind of a stack, but it wasn't. The first Marshall cabinet I was using when I first started touring, when the first album came out in 1970, and I loved that cabinet. It was. I got a stack afterwards.
Right.
But I used a Marshall 8x10.
8x10. I thought you were going to say that.
I loved them, and I'll tell you what. And I might have to visit your shop lately because my good friend John Verity, who I hope's coming in there very soon to talk to us.
Yesterday,
he's just acquired some new Marshall equipment, which I've rather. He'd just better keep his front door shut because I'm going to go around there. He's got 2 2x12s that look like the old 8x10s and 2 heads, and I'm definitely going to pop round there and. I'll pop round and see you at the office.
Come and see me.
But but I do love that. But it's the resonance. You can. Yeah. People have like combos and things like this. You take it off the floor and you notice the difference straight away.
Yeah.
Put it back on the floor, even a little combo. But when you've got a combo on the floor, you can't hear it because it's down below your ankles.
Yeah.
And that's the other thing. You want to hear it.
Yeah.
And you didn't have the benefit of great PA systems in the late 60s, 70s. So
No, they had to really.
so it had
push.
it was throwing it out.
Well, each part of a band was pushing the ultimate result, wasn't it? In a way, Pete, as in the books, and often say Pete Townshend, he's on the guitarist wanted to be louder than the drummer, and then the bass player didn't want to get left behind. And then the drummer's going, "Well, hang on, I'm miking myself up." The poor guy in the front, the singer's going, "Well, hang on, if you lot are doing all that, I want a better PA."
Well, this is this is what you're inferring at the start of this conversation.
Yeah,
it is because of the
driving.
amplification. It
Just
started the sound.
That's also it's remarkable. I
By
mean,
the
let's
way,
just
I'm
get.
always proud to say that if the sound of a Marshall is too loud and it hurts your ears, it's Pete Townshend's fault. If you like the sound, it's the saxophone player's ears.
And let's remember, Marshall is, I can't get the right word, it's very versatile. And one of its main attributes is the reliability of a Marshall amp. I mean, tell me I'm wrong. I imagine soul bands, Motown bands, folk bands, country and western bands. It's not, we're talking rock here, but let's remember that amp is so versatile that it can be used anywhere. And you do see them on, any stage of any ilk, shall we say. You often see a Marshall there. That's right, Terry.
Yes, definitely.
And
And that must please you as the designer, that it can be used for so many different genres of music.
Well, there are so
Strangely
many
enough-
amplified designers since then, over the years. I'm not going to name names, so many of them. And the bottom line is they're just trying to recreate what has already been created.
It's a great compliment.
Yeah.
Because
Well, it's great.
we were the
It's
first.
good that you take it as that, because some people would have been a little bit.
Yeah.
No,
And let's
no,
get.
no.
I mean, what I want to say. Listen, we're going to wrap it up soon because I want to keep it short. And we'll get Terry back. Don't worry, because you can't do all this in one play. You're not getting away with it that easy. There's plenty of more for us to talk about. But for the listener, just try and the viewer, just try and remember this. We're talking a shop that opened 1962, and then you get 7 years
It's
later.
actually in 1960 we opened.
60 the first shot. Sorry,
First
62 the second shot.
Yeah.
So you're talking a 9 year period, and if you think 9 years is a long time, when you get to our age, it's not that long. And there was Marshall's at the top of the mountain, Jimi Hendrix at Woodstock, and I was only watching Live Aid last night.
Yeah.
The brilliant show. If you want to see it, watch the 3-part drama of Bob Geldof and what he did, and Bono and all the guys.
I just started watching
It's
it.
absolutely brilliant, absolutely brilliant. But perhaps knowing that Terry's coming in, status quo go on. The second most iconic gig of all time was on a stage, a rack of Marshall.
Yeah, they put the wall up. didn't they?
There's all the evidence that you need that this guy sitting next to us as what he's done for rock music in itself. So it's a remarkable achievement. Yeah.
It's a lovely display.
And you're still there. Let's quickly brush up. You're still at the company. You're still involved. I can't imagine it's a company you can walk away from. I know you went off and did your music for a few years and what have you, but actually it's a bit like a band. You say, I've had enough, but you never leave the band. You never leave the
Basically,
band.
my heart is in it. I love playing. Recently having a jam with Del. I can't stop.
No.
I can't stop. I've never taken. The only drug I've ever taken my whole life is music.
That's why we're all guilty. We're all addicts.
We
are all addicts.
We met up a few months ago.
And I still need a fix.
Nothing big and grand. It was in a little blues club
Brilliant.
in Bletchley.
Great.
Me and Terry having a blow. It was great.
And before we go, just to prove that you are not only an incredible creator of the amp, but you're a proper musician, and you finally made your album. Was it 2 years ago?
Hey!
Yeah,
And that must. I mean, so I'd love to get you. I would like to come to Marshall's talk about your studio there at some point.
Oh,
as
with
well.
pleasure.
That'd be great, and
I can
I'd love to
organise-
speak to Blake, as we all know, Blake Devitt, because I think he's got stories to
You
tell.
can go.
I'd love to come
have
down,
a
and do
factory
one.
tour.
Yeah, we'll come and do
End up in the studio.
an outside special. But that must have been really pleasing making. I've never made. Well, I've been part of an album, but I've never made my own album. Del's made a superb album, like Forever, as you know. And your album itself, that must have been really pleasing for you.
It was quite exceptional because I was pushed to do it, I must admit, by Steve Tanner, who runs the music side of the company. He runs the studio and all that side. And he said, why don't you do it? So what I did, it was called Terry Marshall and Friends.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason being is it was all musicians I played on stage with and jammed
Right.
with. So that's what's the.
And it's well received, wasn't it?
Yeah, it's had 30,000 streams.
Brilliant.
All right. It always amazed me, quite frankly. Obviously, streams, that must be worth at least £2.50.
We'll get another coffee and spend the millions. Yeah.
I also did an interview with Anderton's Music, and the interview was about an hour long. And that was incredible because that's had 46,000 views.
Wow.
The only trouble is, everyone who's seen it has sent inquiries to me to be Facebook friends.
Oh, yeah.
Right. And I was getting 10 to 14 a day,
Wow.
new things. And so I was looking through and saying, it's all of food, it's all of cats, or it's dogs.
Yeah.
No. Oh, these people have been to a gig, or they're a musician. They're Facebook friends.
Great. Well, that's great to hear you're still rocking. And they say you're obviously a passion for Marshall. But on behalf of not rock music, thank you. Thank you not only for being here, but thank you for what you've given music, Terry.
I'm involved in it until I die, man.
Thank you for joining us. And so, thank you for joining us on the show. We'll be back. So, cheers.